Helmut Marko has opened up on the future of Yuki Tsunoda in Red Bull, as the Japanese driver has been kind of left off in terms of talks about promoting him to the seat next to Verstappen. While names like Ricciardo and Lawson were mentioned often, few realise that Tsunoda is responsible for the 22 out of the 34 points that the team has scored in 2024. But his character and outbursts seem to be the biggest obstacle for a seat in Red Bull. Nevertheless, Marko believes otherwise, as he's now pushing towards the Japanese driver receiving the seat next to Verstappen in the upcoming campaign. So will this be a proper move for Red Bull, given the fact that Perez announced he doesn't want to race for too long? It's safe to say that Yuki Tsunoda is one of the most interesting characters on the grid, but now in his fourth year with Racing Bulls, formerly known as AlphaTauri, the Japanese driver is set for a greater milestone in his career, driving next to Verstappen. Obviously, this is the goal for every driver that sits in the seat of Racing Bulls, and while Ricciardo failed to accomplish it, many have dubbed Lawson to be the next teammate of the Dutchman, as he'll have 6 races now to prove himself in the V-Carb 01. Last year, in the 5-race stint of Lawson, there were 3 races in which both of AlphaTauri's drivers finished the race, and in all of those 3, Lawson was ahead of Tsunoda. But that doesn't automatically mean that he's the next coming of Verstappen or the next champion in the making. Quite the contrary. Helmut Marko, the man responsible for bringing these drivers up through the ranks and putting them in a Red Bull seat if the circumstances allow, believes that Tsunoda has done everything that's been asked of him in order to be promoted to the second seat in Red Bull. Even though Tsunoda didn't actually come from the Red Bull ranks, he was a driver of Honda's academy and still has ties with the Japanese manufacturer. The young driver has shown that there is a lot of unbruised potential that might need a bit of a faster and more competitive car in order to be put in the spotlight. When talking about the opportunity of promoting Tsunoda next to Verstappen, Marko said, "Now we are focusing on our juniors. We see this with Colapinto, for example. He was relatively inexperienced and not very successful in junior series, although it has to be said he never had the best teams. But what an incredible performance he is putting in now, and now let's see what our juniors and Tsunoda can do." Yuki can also be described as a junior, but as I mentioned earlier, how does Tsunoda compare to Lawson is one of the biggest questions we'll have to see answered in the future. There might be a little bit of tension here because Lawson is a product of Red Bull's academy, and he's been brought to this level thanks to Helmut Marko. We do know how fiercely the veteran Austrian advocated for the Kiwi driver to have a seat as early as in the beginning of 2024, and even Horner stated that Marko started the campaign to get Ricciardo out of the seat as early as in Spain this year. Be that as it may, now Racing Bulls will have 2 young and competitive drivers who will give their all to show their superiors that they have what it takes in order to be called Red Bull drivers. As you already know, the biggest problem with Tsunoda is the anger outbursts that, while have been quite diminished now, especially with the swearing penalties being handed to Verstappen from the previous weekend playing a huge role, Yuki still has moments where he lets the emotions get the best out of him. Even Tsunoda himself stated that Ricciardo helped him a lot in controlling his emotions and giving calmer answers on the radio when the session is messy, because at the end of the day, everything depends on the feedback that will be provided from the driver to their engineers. If you keep saying that your car is screwed or use foul language without actually explaining deeply what is wrong with it, your chances of driving a car that could fight for the championship are 0 to none. This is why Red Bull, as well as Racing Bulls, want to see how Tsunoda will do against Lawson, and in the first shootout of 5 races, it didn't go exactly as planned for the Japanese driver. However, if we are to see the first 10 races in 2023, where many said that De Vries will absolutely show how bad Tsunoda is as a driver, Yuki withstood the pressure and made sure to show the entire Formula 1 world that he's not there by accident. Of course, the Honda ties will always connect him to a seat with Aston Martin, given the fact that these two sides will collaborate exclusively from 2026 onwards, but it doesn't automatically mean that Tsunoda won't be considered as a proper candidate for Red Bull. It's now more than ever that he will need to keep his cool and make sure that the Austrian team will see the true potential he has. Of course, with all of his negative antics being polished to extreme. What it doesn't help is that Horner stated that Red Bull would make a silly move if they weren't able to look outside of their drivers pool for 2026 and see that a driver of Russell's caliber is available, meaning that they are ready to do what they did with Perez and sign a driver who hasn't had a relationship with Red Bull's academy in the past. Of course, this move is very unlikely to happen, as Wolff has jumped aggravated from these statements of Horner, but it just goes to show that the Austrian team is ready to do anything it takes just to keep Yuki out of a Red Bull seat. And it's not like they are afraid Yuki will outperform Verstappen, but it's just his pure character and inconsistency that need a lot of polishing that are keeping Red Bull away from this move, which then again could be good news for Lawson if he manages to drive a perfect remainder of 2024. Liam Lawson doesn't have a contract for 2025 with AlphaTauri because Marko stated that the cards will be reshuffled for next year, meaning that we might be set for a huge surprise in the drivers' market sooner rather than later. Nevertheless, Nico Rosberg, the 2016 F1 champion, believes that while the performance of Yuki is definitely there to be considered as a Red Bull driver, the swings in his moods and behaviour towards the racing engineer is what is keeping Red Bull to be sidelined on the matter. As the German elaborated, "I think Yuki is doing well and his peaks are very strong, like in Singapore. He did a great qualifying. The problem is there is a bit of inconsistency there, and then his attitude sometimes, is very aggressive, and that is why he was looked over this year when they were looking to potentially replace Perez. So that definitely came as a bit of a blow to him, because I'm sure he had hopes on that. But anyways, he is doing a good job at racing bulls." Furthermore, Rosberg also has spoken about the prospects of Lawson and stated how important it would be for Red Bull to have the Kiwi driver perform well, because now Perez has two threats for his seat, both ready to leave absolutely everything on the track in the matter of 6 races and 3 sprint events to maybe push Red Bull in a direction in which they will be replacing Perez from 2025 onwards. Adding more to this, Rosberg said, "Red Bull does not see Tsunoda as quite strong enough to be replacing Perez. Ricciardo is out, so there's not really a replacement, and that is making it even more difficult. It's also strange with Perez because we all know he is a good driver, and at times he was challenging Max for the World Championship in small segments, even last year." So anyways, they're giving Tsunoda a chance now until the end of the year, obviously, and I think they will still need to review it again then for next year. That is another reason that they want to try Lawson out, because if Lawson does amazingly well for these last 6 races, then certainly he would be considered for the main Red Bull seat for next year. With all this in mind, the situation in Red Bull is all but fixed, especially if you add the fact that they are yet to get on top of their problems with the car's behaviour and widening the operating window. Therefore, do you think that Tsunoda is the right choice for Red Bull? And more importantly, do you think that Lawson might do a better job in that seat, even though he has less experience than Yuki? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, have a look at the video that's appearing on your screen right now.